In the world of cinema, betrayal is not killed with a knife. It is killed with a smile, with a glance, with a single word. From family to lover to homeland. These aren't just movies. These are crimes against the heart. Some people aren't wounded by bullets. They are wounded by the trust they gave to someone who didn't deserve it. Welcome to this distinguished series of Top 10 Betrayals in Movie History. Michael Corleone's betrayal scene in The Godfather Part III, 1990, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, is considered one of the most poignant betrayals in cinematic history. The film continues Michael's story as he attempts to purge his family of blood. But he fails, losing everything: his father, his daughter, and his soul. The famous line, "Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in," has become a cultural icon. Today, this film is taught in philosophy schools as an example of tragic destiny. This isn't just a betrayal. This is an existential catastrophe, portrayed as a family story. Because some people aren't defeated by bullets, they're defeated by their love. In 1990, while the world thought it was witnessing the end of a mafia empire, no one expected that the killer would not be an enemy, but his own son. Michael had spent his entire life trying to escape the blood. He wanted to cleanse the family, to become an honest businessman. But he forgot one rule: blood is indelible. He was just waiting for the right moment. At that moment, Michael wasn't a mafia boss. He wasn't a businessman. He was just a son. He knew his father was going to be killed. He knew he couldn't save him, not because he was weak, but because he himself was part of the reason. Some betrayals don't make a noise. You don't need a weapon. You don't need a plan. A look is enough to understand that love is dead and that family is nothing anymore. Since that day, the public no longer trusted repentance. It no longer believed in the final promise. Because The Godfather Part III taught us one lesson. Sometimes the one person who can't save their family is the one who built the empire with his own hands. The betrayal scene in Gone Girl, 2014, directed by David Fincher, is considered one of the most powerful infidelity scenes in the history of psychological cinema. Based on the novel of the same name, the film tells the story of a wife who disappears and plots to blame her husband. Amy Donnell creates the perfect victim character to portray her husband as a murderer. The line, "What have we done to each other?" has become a cultural icon. Today, this film is taught in psychology schools as an example of antisocial personality disorder. This isn't just a betrayal. This is a psychological disaster portrayed as a crime film. Because some people don't commit crimes with a knife. They commit crimes with words.
I'm going to disappear. I'm really going to disappear so the world can think about what I'm planning.
In 2014, while the world thought it was watching the story of a husband accused of murdering his wife, no one expected that the crime wasn't in the house, but in her diary.
I plan my disappearance. I'm gonna make my husband look like the killer.
You think you know everything, but you're wrong. I'm not who you think I am. She was perfect. How do you become the monster?
At that moment, the killer wasn't caught. The trap door didn't open. But he knew the truth. I didn't lose my wife. I created her. And that every kiss, every touch, every promise was a representation of a character created by her sick mind. Some betrayals don't make a fuss. They start with a smile, with a kiss, with the sentence, "I'm pregnant." Because Gone Girl wasn't a crime movie. It was a psychoanalysis of a marital breakdown. Amy emerges from the woods, raising her hands like a survivor, like a victim, smiling and walking with confident steps, showing her true smile, full of victory, full of something that no one could explain except her. Some betrayals don't make a fuss. They start with a smile, with a kiss, with the sentence, "I'm pregnant." Because Gone Girl wasn't a crime movie. It was a psychoanalysis of a marital breakdown.
I'm going to be pregnant soon.
The betrayal scene in My Fair Lady, 1964, directed by George Cukor, is considered one of the most moving scenes of emotional betrayal in classic cinema history. Inspired by the play Pygmalion, the film tells the story of a speech professor who teaches a street girl how to speak like a princess. Their relationship evolves from teaching to an unspoken emotional connection. The film's ending is open-ended. Does he love her? Will she come back? The line "I've grown accustomed to her face" has become a cultural icon. Today, this film is taught in literature colleges as an example of class and emotional conflict. This isn't just a betrayal. This is a human catastrophe captured as a musical. Because some people aren't hurt by words. They're hurt by silence. In 1964, while the world thought it was watching the story of a street girl's transformation into a princess, no one expected that the biggest prize would not be the royal ceremony, but the heartbreaking decision. At that moment, she didn't say a word, she didn't apologize, but he knew the truth. She was no longer my student. She had become a woman, and that every lesson, every scream, every training was a path to losing her.
Thank you for everything.
Please, don't raise your voice. I don't like noise.
Some betrayals don't make a noise. They start with silence, with a look, with a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Because My Fair Lady wasn't a transformation movie. It was the breaking of a relationship that wasn't even born. From that day on, the public no longer trusted transformation. They no longer believed in education, because My Fair Lady taught us one lesson. Sometimes the only person who can't keep what they've made is the one who didn't realize they were making love. The betrayal scene in Casablanca, 1942, directed by Michael Curtiz, is considered one of the most emotionally moving scenes in classic cinema history. The film tells the story of a man confronting his past when his lover returns with her revolutionary husband. Rick chooses to sacrifice his love for a greater cause. The line, "Here's looking at you, kid," has become a cultural icon. Today, this film is taught in film schools as an example of sacrifice for freedom. This isn't just a betrayal. This is a human catastrophe portrayed as a war movie, because some people aren't wounded by weapons. They're wounded by the right choice. In 1942, while the world thought it was watching a love story between a man and a woman in wartime, no one expected that betrayal wasn't in the kiss, but in the decision.
You belong to me.
At that moment, she wasn't shot. The trapdoor didn't open. But he knew the truth. I didn't lose my love. I was the one who sent her away. And that every kiss, every night, every memory was a path to this airport.
Stay back, or I'll shoot.
Some betrayals don't make a noise. They start with a look, with silence, with the sentence, "She belongs to you." Because Casablanca wasn't a war movie. It was a masterpiece about sacrifice in the name of greater love. Since that day, the public no longer trusted the last promise. It no longer believed in eternal love, because Casablanca taught us one lesson. Sometimes the only person who can't keep the one they love is the one who pushes them to be free. Rick and Lois walk together and walk away. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship that will be free of influences. The betrayal scene in The Accountant, 2016, directed by Gavin O'Connor, is considered one of the most powerful psychological betrayal scenes in modern cinematic history. The film tells the story of a socially deaf accountant who is a professional assassin. Chris Pinner builds a real marriage, but lies to his wife about his true identity. The line, "I balance the books, and sometimes I balance other things," has become a cultural icon. Today, this film is taught in psychology colleges as an example of dual identity. This isn't just a betrayal. This is a psychological disaster filmed as an action movie. Because some people aren't wounded by a gun. They're wounded by real love with an imaginary person. Chris was so good at shooting love scenes with his wife that no one could imagine otherwise. In 2016, while the world thought it was watching the story of an ordinary accountant living a simple life, no one expected that the man the wife loved was the killer himself.
When will you be able to finish your last assignment?
Soon, I promise.
At that moment, the enemy wasn't killed. The deception wasn't revealed. But he knew the truth. I didn't lose my normal life. I built the illusion. And that every kiss, every touch, every promise was a representation of someone who didn't exist.
When will this end?
Some betrayals don't make a fuss. They start with a smile, with a look of love, with the sentence, "I'll be back tomorrow." Because The Accountant wasn't an action movie. It was a psychoanalysis of a man in love with the one who lied to him.
Since that day, the public no longer trusted simplicity. They no longer believed in the quiet man, because the accountant taught us one lesson. Sometimes, the only person who can't keep their love is the one who kills in its name. The betrayal scene in The Lives of Others 2006, directed by Flavorian Hendingove, is considered one of the most moving scenes of human betrayal in the history of European cinema. The film is inspired by true events in East Germany. It tells the story of a spy who transforms from an observer to a protector of the artists he spies on. The line, "Glauben Sie an Gott, nein, then glauben Sie an dieses Buch," has become a cultural icon. The film won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film and was included in The Guardian's list of the 100 greatest films. Today, this film is taught in philosophy faculties as an example of conscience in a time of oppression. This is not just a betrayal. This is a silent revolution that began with headphones. Because some people don't resist with weapons. They resist with silence. At first, Captain Whistler continued to eavesdrop on Krista and Jordan's calls and learn about their secrets and private lives while sitting alone. In 2006, while the world thought it was watching the story of an East German spy, no one expected that treason was not against the state, but against itself.
There is nothing suspicious.
At that moment, no agent was killed, no secret file was opened, but he knew the truth. The state lies, and art cannot be hidden, and that every word recorded was evidence of the humanity of the dead regime. Since that day, the public no longer trusted surveillance. It no longer believed the spy. Because the lives of others taught us one lesson. Sometimes, the only person who can betray the system is the one who knows all its secrets. The betrayal scene in Scott McCarthy's 2011 film Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene is one of the most powerful psychological betrayals in independent cinema history. The film is inspired by true stories about racist religious cults. Martha, Elizabeth Olsen, escapes a cult but is unable to escape its influence. The line, "I was never who you thought I was," has become a cultural icon. Today, this film is taught in psychology schools as an example of schizotypal personality disorder and brainwashing. This isn't just a betrayal. This is a psychological catastrophe portrayed as a return journey. Because some people aren't imprisoned by irons. They're imprisoned by memories they can't distinguish from reality. In 2011, while the world thought it was watching the story of a girl who ran away from home, no one expected that the escape wasn't from her family, but to her.
You're welcome here. No questions, no old names.
Here, Clara. Thomas, keep watch by the door.
Henry, I've got the left side covered.
At that moment, she wasn't killed, she wasn't kidnapped, but she knew the truth. I didn't find freedom. I just traded one prison for another, and that every kiss, every touch, every promise was part of a brainwashing process. Her way of speaking has changed. She wears simple clothes. She sleeps with Patrick. Her smile no longer reaches her eyes. Some betrayals don't make a noise. They start with a look. Silence. I'm safe now. Martha returns to her sister. False safety. A woman hugs her sister in a modern house, but her eyes scan the room for danger.
Who are you? I'm Martha.
Since that day, the public no longer believed in return. They no longer believed in survival. Because Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene taught us one lesson. Sometimes, the only person who can't escape a cult is the one who carries it inside their mind. The betrayal scene in The Death of Stalin, 2017, directed by Armando Iannucci, is one of the most influential scenes of political betrayal in the history of satirical cinema. The film is inspired by a true event, Stalin's death in 1953, and the leadership struggle that followed. Ivan Ryskov, inspired by real figures such as Nikolai Bulgakov, represents the voice of reason amidst the chaos of greed. The line, "You're not arresting anyone," has become a cultural icon. Today, this film is taught in political science schools as an example of regimes collapsing from within. This isn't just a betrayal. This is a silent revolution that began with a single word. Because some people don't resist with weapons, they resist with courage. In 2017, while the world thought it was watching a comedy about the death of a dictator, no one could have predicted that the comedy was a cover for a political betrayal that shook the empire. Scene: after Stalin's death, the Politburo members meet. Each one is smiling, but his eyes search for power.
We must open up the country. We must free the prisoners.
At that moment, he wasn't shot. He wasn't thrown out of the hall. But he knew the truth. The party doesn't want freedom. It wants fear to continue. And that every word he said was a betrayal of the system within which he had built himself. Stalin's empty chair, a symbol of fear, tyranny, rule by blood and force. Rysakov walks through Moscow, rejected hero. A man walks down a snowy Moscow street, people watching from windows. Some wave, others hide. Since that day, the public no longer trusted closed meetings. It no longer believed in laughter in the red halls. Because the death of Stalin taught us one lesson. Sometimes, the only person who can betray the regime is the one who dares to say, enough. The betrayal scene in Clint Eastwood's J. Edgar 2011 is considered one of the most influential scenes of political betrayal in American cinematic history. The film tells the story of John Edgar Hoover, who led the FBI for over 50 years. He used his power to spy on presidents, destroy the lives of citizens, and falsify evidence. The line, "I am the law," has become a cultural icon. Today, this film is taught in law schools as an example of the abuse of power in the name of security. This isn't just treason. This is a revolution within the system, from within. Because some people don't resist with weapons, They resist with files. In 2011, while the world thought it was watching the story of the FBI director, no one could have predicted that treason was not against a foreign enemy, but against the Constitution itself. J. Edgar Hoover, who led the FBI for more than 50 years, used his power to spy, destroy citizens' lives, and falsify evidence. He did not hesitate to do these things.
Be careful about what we discuss over these lines. The walls have ears.
Honey, I'll be home late tonight. The situation here is complicated.
A man in a formal suit, his face half dark, looks at pictures of his victims. Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Paul Robertson.
I do not protect the law. I enforce it.
At that moment, no one was killed, no bullet was fired. But he knew the truth. Democracy is not protected by justice. It is ruled by fear, and that every falsified file was a weapon in his silent war. The man is spy on the president's phone call and hears a voice through the phone saying, "I will stop you if you continue." Some betrayals don't make any noise. They begin with a recording, with a message, because J. Edgar wasn't a biographical film. It was an exposé of the hidden face of the state. Since that day, the public no longer trusts the national hero. They no longer believe the man who carries the flag. Because J. Edgar taught us one lesson. Sometimes, the only person who can betray democracy is the one who holds all its secrets. The scene of betrayal in the film Amadeus, 1984, directed by Milos Forman, is considered one of the most impactful depictions of artistic betrayal in the history of cinema. The film is inspired by a fictionalized account of Salieri's relationship with Mozart, but it reflects a profound psychological truth. Salieri, a mediocre musician, feels divinely wronged for not being granted genius. The line, "Am I to be the only God who doesn't get to be God?" has become a cultural icon. The film won 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Actor. This is not just betrayal. This is a crime against beauty. Because some people are not destroyed by weapons. They are destroyed by envy. In 1984, while the world thought it was witnessing the story of a musical genius, no one expected that the betrayal would not be against the enemy, but against beauty itself. Salieri hears Mozart for the first time. He seems impressed at first glance, but his expression changes from admiration to jealousy to hatred.
This is not the work of a human being. But
At that moment, no musician was killed, no work was stolen, but he knew the truth. I don't hate him. I hate that God gave him everything and left me searching for a single drop, and that every note he heard was a stab in his heart. Conspiracy from within the cathedral. Salieri writes an anonymous letter asking Mozart to compose a requiem for the dead. He says, "Let this be his last work." Mozart is writing his last composition while in bed, and Salieri is hiding behind the curtain, waiting for him to finish writing. Salieri takes the manuscript. Theft of legacy. An older man picks up a music manuscript titled Requiem. He smiles faintly. Some betrayals don't make a sound. They begin with adoration, with prayer. Because Amadeus wasn't a music film, it was an unveiling of the face of jealousy beneath worship. Mozart is dead. The pen falls, the music stops, the rain continues. Salieri feels guilty. Since that day, the public no longer trusts the admirer. They no longer believe the teacher. Because Amadeus taught us one lesson. Sometimes, the only person who can betray genius is the one who claims to love it.